Hello, everyone. Before we start our panel, I would like to tell you a short anecdote from last night. Those of you who were with us during the opening ceremony might remember that we urged you to talk to at least 5 leaders of a different generation each day. Yesterday evening, a nice gentleman came up to me and very proudly told me that he'd already spoken to 7 leaders of tomorrow, and he was trying to get 3 more to get the 10 full by the evening. This has made me really proud to see how all of you are so committed to participate in intergenerational dialogue. But on a more serious note, let's get into this panel. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has had a far-reaching consequence for global food security, particularly felt in emerging economies and developing countries. This has really showed us the deep interdependence, how events on one side of the globe affect all of the globe. This underlines the importance of collaboration, one of the key principles of the new generational contract we are establishing with the Club of Rome. How challenging this can be in a highly interconnected world will be at the core of this discussion. I would like to introduce you to our panel. We're going to start with Professor SimonEvenett, Professor of International Trade and Economic Development and coordinator of the Global Trade Alert. Then we have Bineta Diop, Senegalese women rights activist on the board of the Hunger Project, fighting against chronic hunger. We have Erik Fyrwald, CEO of Syngenta, and decades of experience within the agriculture industry. And Peter Maurer, former president of the Red Cross with a long history of diplomacy and president of the Basel Institute of Government. Please help me welcome them on stage.
Welcome, everyone, to this session on global food insecurity and hopefully moves towards global food security. Let's turn that around with a more positive sign. We are here to discuss both the manifestations of food insecurity as well as potential solutions. This is not really a subject which needs much introduction, given its salience, but in terms of flashpoints, earlier this year, the World Bank estimated that there were 200 million people in an emergency situation or famine situation which needed to be addressed. And we, of course, have had higher food prices. Food prices may have been falling, according to the FAO, for the last 12 months. But let's not forget that the food prices are at levels we have not seen since the 1970s, when you correct for inflation. And food prices are now twice the level they were at the start of this millennium. So there's a trend increase in food prices which must affect the availability and affordability as well. There are, of course, some flashpoints that we have seen, potential aggravating factors. Our moderator mentioned the consequences of the invasion of Ukraine. And of course, we're very mindful of the fact that on the 18th of May, the Black Sea deal will have to be renewed. That is the deal that allows Ukrainian wheat and other cereals to be shipped out. And Russia is again seeking further concessions in order to allow that to continue. That's one important flashpoint. There are, and of course, it's just one of the conflicts around the world which affect food security. It's not the only one. And then, of course, we have the more trend-related factors. And of course, top of that list is climate change. So we have essentially a phenomenon which has trend drivers, additional disruptive factors, and itself food insecurity is often an aggravating factor for other problems. And the work here of the Red Cross comes to mind, and they have often highlighted how humanitarian crises and conflicts are exacerbated by food insecurity as well. So I paint a little bit of the picture here, but we're of course here to listen to our three fabulous speakers. And so all of them have been primed for the first question, which is really over the next 5 years, what do they see as the threat to food insecurity or threat of food insecurity, which will harm the most people? That's the first question they're all going to try and answer. And let's get on with it. Bineta, please, what's your answer to that rather far-reaching question?
Thank you so much. So delighted to be here representing the Hunger Project. And this is our bread and butter, the work that we do in Africa, in Asia, Latin America. But I will start by what you say, this triple C that is affecting us right now. You said it, the climate change, which is really have an impact, socio-economic, political. We have also the conflict, Ukraine, you name it, but our own internal conflict in Africa as well. And we see that also the overall impact on this on our continent. But in the 5 years to come, for me, we are looking into how we're going to build communities, community-led development. Because if we're talking about resilience, it's about empowering the young people, because Africa is going to, we are 1 billion and 0.2 right now in terms of population, and the youth and the women. So the 5 years to come, if we want to respond to the food security right now, we need to build the resilience of our community to respond to that. But we need also to make sure that the leadership, we shift the mindset in terms of producing from the community, making sure also the women lead and the young women, the young men and women are empowered to transform the agriculture sector. So 5 years to come, this is what I could see the transformation in our continent.
And could you tell us a little bit more about the Hunger Project and how you've been translating that into results on the ground?
The Hunger Project, come in 1977, and we operate in Africa in community-led development. And I think it's about how do you build resilience and for the people to be self-reliant at the end of the day. We are not coming there to say that we know what you are doing, but you know what you can do, but we are here to facilitate. And looking into the system and how do we work to, with them, for them to dismantle that system that make them remaining in poverty, making them not having access to food and having access to so many things, fertilizers, and but also the human dimension, security around it. How do we make sure that they also the education of their children? It's important because it's around the food that you can build the ecosystem that provide for the women the education of their girls, so they don't go far to make sure that their children are educated. The other issue is the health. And we at the Hunger Project, we build partnership with others to make sure that we provide those services, but they are the one to build it. I was in Mexico recently with our board in Chiapas, but also in the indigenous people, and see what they are doing themselves. But we are supporting them, for example, bringing new technology. The young people, they never been exposed to the technology, and we were able to partner with the company to bring, for example, the computers in the school, bringing also the solar energy and so on and so forth. This is what Hunger Project do, and we invest on the people themselves. The lead and concentrate on women leadership, because we know that the patriarchal system is keeping, either it is the land, they are the men who cultivate, and the women. 70% of those who are in the land are the women, those who produce the food, and those who put it at the table to eat. But yet, we don't give them the leadership in controlling the land, the water, and so many other things around it. So it's time for us, for a paradigm shift to see, empower the people, provide them with the necessary skills, provide them with the, the knowledge as well. And I think that's why University of St.Gallen are doing this kind of research on how we can, on what we produce and how we can scale it up, because it's possible. Africa can feed the world. That's the situation. We have arable land, so much, but we are still fighting. For example, we just talked about Sudan. Sudan, which is in conflict right now, and you hear it. Yesterday, there was a killing of one of the great artists, a female artist in Sudan. Sudan is in trouble. It's not just Sudan, the Sahel, but so many arable land, so many, water that we can, So, yes, climate change is there. We have drought, some part. We have also, flood, like it was in Mozambique recently, in many other places. So, but it's time for us to say, yes, of course, we are in a global village. What affects you, like the war in Ukraine, is affecting Africa and vice versa. So we need to take together some of the innovative solutions. It means that we invest on the human capital. It's possible. Let's do that, but also let's look at how we fight some of the issues that impede on the development of Africa. So I think that the conversation here is there are solutions. We know, and one of the solutions, for example, is what we do at the Hunger Project, but we make sure that we scale them up. And that's the way why we are here, to say, how do we build that platform together of the, like-minded, like Syngenta and others, to make sure that we, can support our population for Africa to develop. If Africa remains as it is, I don't think that the whole world will continue their development agenda. Okay. So it's a time for us to think together and making sure that we respond to the need of our population. And I think the food is one of the critical issues, because around food, you build all the ecosystem that can make the world better, as we have seen right now. Thank you.
No. So food security is a linchpin for economic and social development. A very powerful message. Maybe you can come to Erik. What's your assessment looking forward over the next 5 years, the biggest threat?
Well, to me, there are two giant threats. One is conflict, and the other is climate. But let me dig into conflict for a moment here to just kind of scale this, because there already was food security challenges in the world, and then the war in Ukraine. So last year at this time, I was in Ukraine with our team. We have 731 people in Ukraine serving farmers despite the war to try to get a good crop grown and then out of Ukraine. Before the war, Ukraine fed 400 million people. Now Ukraine's growing about half that crop. And as you know, challenging to get the crop out of Ukraine. So that's a big deal. That's a huge challenge. Part of what we were doing in Ukraine was working with the UN World Food Program, because they were feeding 140 million people, and half of that came from Ukraine. So working with the head of the UN World Food Program at the time, David Beasley, and our team, we're talking about how do we help farmers grow more, and how do we get it as much as we can out of Ukraine. Then David calls me up and says, I want you to see a place in Africa which has huge potential. So 2 months ago, we took a trip with the UN World Food Program team to Sudan and met with our team and the World Food Program and the government people. We went to the Jazeera big project to grow more in Sudan. Sudan has tremendous agriculture potential, great soils, lots of groundwater, lots of surface water. huge potential. We came away so inspired about the potential for Sudan to help feed the Sudanese and Africa and the world, and then conflict. And now there's 43 million people in Sudan that are many of them are going hungry. And our team in Sudan is talking about getting out of Sudan instead of feeding the people. So to me, we've got to find ways to resolve these conflicts so that the whole world can work together to provide food security for all in a way that also addresses climate change, because that's the other big threat.
Or maybe I give you the opportunity to amplify on the climate change side too, to help fill out the picture for us, please.
So agriculture contributes, by here, 12 to 14% of greenhouse gas emissions. The ag food system, a third of greenhouse gases. We cannot solve climate change without addressing the food system, agriculture food system. And we can do it. We talk about, many people are talking about regenerative agriculture. How do we make soils healthier? How do we give farmers throughout the world, including in Africa, the knowledge, the capability, and the tools to grow crops sustainably, despite higher temperatures, despite droughts, despite flooding, these weather extremes. We have the technologies, we have to get them to the farmers, and we have to do it in a way that not only enables the farmers to grow good crops, but connects them to the downstream markets so that the whole system is working. And that requires companies, NGOs, governments, and food companies, the whole system working together. So that's the third C, collaboration, in my view, is the solution.
Thank you very much, Erik. Peter, maybe we could draw on your distinguished career and to ask you to reflect on the biggest threat to food security in the next 5 years.
Well, thanks a lot, and also for having me on the panel. I mean, like my colleagues who spoke beforehand, I have traveled the same places. I have seen the same issues, and I make basically the same analysis. When you work at the conflict of humanitarian problems around the world, food security comes as one key element in breakdowns of social systems. Whenever I visited context, it was the combination of food scarcity or insecurity combined with water scarcity and insecurity and management issues, combined with serious health issues, combined with the impact of climate change on the productivity of land. And so you have this conundrum of problems. And when you try to prioritize what comes for the next 5 years, I would say be prepared for worse and everything. Because you never know what the next challenge through which door it enters. It may enter through the door of nutrition and food insecurity. It may enter through massive impact of global disruptions on global markets, which has repercussion effects on prices and has repercussion effects on fiscal income and possibilities of states, not least of the poorest populations in the world. And it may come through different combinations. And I think my biggest fear has always been that we haven't yet understood that it is not only a systemic issue, but in the system there is now unforeseeability because you don't know exactly how the different elements will combine and where it pops into your face, and suddenly you are confronted with a major crisis. And I think that's, for me, a little bit the big challenge is really to contextualize the food security issue in a more systemic approach to providing social systems to people. And here I couldn't agree more with Bineta that one of the most powerful things that you can do, despite all the disruptions that we will live, is indeed to strengthen local communities and their capacities. And I would add one element to Bineta's. I know that she also thinks about these issues, but it is not only about the community-based skills, but it is also about legitimacy.
Yeah.
And what strikes me is this intrinsic link of food security to the political and cultural environment in which you intervene. And you can do whatever you want and which is technically feasible if it is not legitimate, if it is not carried by the community, if it is not transported by the community, you are doomed. And maybe one last point which links my previous work to my present work. As a president of Basel Institute on Governance, we do have in the midst of food security, of broader social system issues, serious governance problems. And the most serious governance problems connected to the food security issue is land and land ownership, land reform, and the legal systems with which access to land and access to productive land is regulated. And this is an issue of power. And there I'm back with the men and women that we have already spoken about.
Could I ask you, since you raised this question of legitimacy, in your experience, what was the most compelling intervention which started off in a situation where perhaps the authorities or someone was illegitimate and yet somehow built trust and turned the population into supporting the initiative? So how do you build legitimacy when there has been illegitimacy to start with? I mean, if you, an example would really help us, I think, get our heads around
I
this.
do believe that whatever interventions you do on whatever angle of social breakdowns, I would agree that the community-based consultation process is the most important one. It's an issue of bottom-up, top-down at the end of the day. And I think we have to learn to expand our interventions not as top-down interventions, but as interventions which are owned, discussed, carried forward by communities. We spend such an absurd amount of time in terms of rationality of your work in consultation process in the farthest away village in the most affected regions. And people, although they are at the brink of starvation, they won't agree if they haven't discussed it amongst themselves. And I think we still have this huge challenge that we see pressing needs, which instinctively make us work fast and effective and efficient, while at the end of the day, we need to mirror those needs and our approaches to consultation processes which allow us then really to build systems. And then the government, the central government will react when they see that 1,000 communities, it will bubble up and it will change realities. But if we don't go that way, we will be seen as interventionists from very often governments with precarious legitimacy or with bad reputation in a certain regions, or governments part of the conflict, which anyway populations are suffering. So I just wanted to sensitize us about this enormously important kind of approach of how. It's not only about what. The what we will care about. The how, that's much more complicated. And you have to understand the fabrics of societies, the conflict, the local conflict dynamics. You have to know whom you appoint to carry forward your project. And then it gets a little bit complicated.
So let's keep discussing the how, because I think that's the solution-oriented approach we like here at the symposium. Now, you can't fail but be impressed at the energy of the young people who come to this symposium, drawn from all over the world. So my next question to our panelists is, how can young people contribute to this overarching systemic problem? So who in the panel would like to take that up first?
Let me just say that what in Africa, the young people, that are already leading. We call them the leaders now. Of course, we talk about tomorrow, but they are already on the seat by challenging, because what Peter have talked about is on our governance, which sometimes are failing us. We need to to change that kind of system that is existing, and we need to have new leadership. We need to have, the young people brain and competence and expertise to come in. As we say that we need, what yesterday we were talking about, the feminist, policy that we need to have. We need to bring new people in the discourse, in the narrative. The old do that I would not say just men, but because I'm one of the oldest in this room, maybe in our context, I would say we have failed. We have to accept that. Maybe we have still experience, and the young people can learn from our own experience, and we are willing to do so. We are mentoring, we are coaching, we are exchanging. Sometimes I would say that even they co-lead us, we co-lead, because it's not just us being leader and sharing, but at the community, you can see it, that the young people are the driving force in those communities, and they are very vibrant, and they're using what existing social media right now is everywhere. They're learning very fast, and what we need to do is to provide them with as we say, the skills, education and skills, for them to be able to perform, and making sure that our government that are also, because we need to engage with them as well, to make sure that the system they put in place is friendly and provide job to the young people, opening up for jobs and private sector. And that's where we see the engagement between public and private sector to work together. It's not the government, and I always say, government cannot provide job. It's not their role. What we need is to make sure that private sector can come in, have an environment that is friendly to create job. So the policy are put in place. And as we say that, have that. And we were just talking about some of the system that is existing of corruption. We need, the young people will come to new mindset to say that we need to fight corruption, because this is one of the, the disease that we are, a lot of resources in Africa, potential, so many things. So we need really to make sure that, the young people are put in at the front to fight some of the bad things and contribute positively as well.
Can I just continue where Bineta stops? I would say that the most promising and interesting amplifiers of what we tried to do in any project, and not only in Africa, is young entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, the key issue is where is the sort of logic and perspective under which you support the how. And if we don't bring entrepreneurial logic to food production in Africa, and if we don't build on women and youth entrepreneur, we will not manage. It's not. It will be even worse. I mean, dumping food on Africa and have it distributed by young people is not the solution. Right. It's giving capital to young people and women in order to be able to mount agricultural production against returns. And there, the international system is by and large failing because nobody offers capital for risk entrepreneurs in Africa doing food production. Philanthropists do here and there. That's great stuff, but it's insufficient and it's insufficiently scaled. And I do believe that's where an institution like St.Gallen has a role. I mean, not you all here, but you young people studying at St.Gallen, you want to become entrepreneurs. And I think as entrepreneurs in developed contexts, one of the big responsibilities you have is really to try to build entrepreneurship in fragile contexts. And I think one of the troubling issues which I always encounter on the issue of food production is that we still have sometimes kind of a romantic, wrong idea about food production. Food production is always linked to this nice agricultural landscape of the good traditional African society and the beautiful village and the roundels. And I think we have to get out of these images. Food production in Africa has to be cutting edge, young women entrepreneurs producing food, and capital has to go to the most fragile contexts. And this is the critical issue we need to address. And their risk and de-risking capital investments in Africa is one of the big issues. I mean, I don't want, but I also understand this is one of the challenges of big companies like yours.
Yeah.
So Erik, that's a perfect segue.
Yeah, so Syngenta is in over 100 countries around the world, and we sell seeds, crop protection chemistry and biologicals, and crop nutrition products. And in the developing world, Europe, North America, Brazil, there's a well-established channel to get to farmers. The technologies, the know-how. The problem with the smallholder farmers in the developing world is there's not that full capability to serve farmers. So 6 years ago, we decided that we were going to start a brand new business called MAP, Modern Agriculture Platform. And the concept was we're going to bring total solutions to farmers. So everything they need, sample their soil, provide them the products, the technologies, the agronomic advice, and we have young people at each of these MAP centers called MAPPers, very young people, many women that are really excited to help farmers locally. And then we help them get higher yields, healthier soils, and then we connect them downstream to the demand, to the food companies that want high quality, sustainably grown products. This business was 0 6 years ago. Last year, it was $4 billion. And I can tell you that the energy from the people that are these mappers that are serving farmers locally, it's like they're running their own business, helping the farmers. And then they grow and they go to bigger MAP centers and they become leaders. This is a model that's working, and it's working in China, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and India, because the federal government supports them. The local governments, we always go to the local government before we establish a MAP center, and the local government has to be contributing, they have to be engaged. And then we get other local partners, whether it's a food company downstream or others that can help put this together, financing arm, insurance, but you bring a solution. So we're now starting to do this in Africa. And we met with the president of Tanzania. She's a wonderful woman. She wants local villages to adopt these solution centers. So we're getting a coalition of NGOs and companies and local officials supported by the national government to put in place our first MAP center in Tanzania. And by the way, Wilmar, a global agriculture company, has put in place a rice processing center in Tanzania and has asked us to put a MAP center because, like we do in China and Indonesia for them, put a MAP center. And they've gotten their first high-quality rice for Tanzania and for export. The first time ever been high enough quality to export from Tanzania. And the mappers working on this in Tanzania are learning how to be agronomists, how to be entrepreneurs, how to bring solutions. I think this collaborative model, local governments supported by federal governments that want to help the people, companies working together with each other to serve the farmers, but also connecting to the demand downstream. If we do this well, this can unlock the potential.
I just wanted to add something because this is a great model, and what Peter have said, and it's creating the critical mass of entrepreneur. Yes, you know, we need to do that, and the critical mass of entrepreneur. If I take women in the entire value chain. You know, I was in Malawi on the agriculture and, you know, looking at the middleman, the one who is just sitting there and just buying at a very low price, while the women spend all their time in their cooperatives, and the middleman will come and take it. And, you know, so we need to build the women entrepreneurs who are producing,
exactly,
the one that is transforming, the one that is selling and in the market. So we see them in the entire value chain by building the capacity of those, because they exist, they are there. What they need is that investment for them to have innovative way, and not just at, you know, making them produce and somebody else will come and take it. What you need is to build for the women and the young people to be part of the system, throughout the system, until the market, and not just until the market, even at the table. So at the end of the day, who produce the, you know, the food at the table are the women as well. So we need to have them throughout the value chain. And I think the model of bringing public-private sector, NGOs together, all at the same platform, is something that we need to scale up in many places, and in particular where we are, you know, functioning in Africa and other parts of the world.
And the really important piece of this is, when we started this MAP concept, we helped the farmers, and they grew more. But then if they could get a lower price, if the downstream or the middleman could get a lower price somewhere else, they wouldn't buy from these farmers. So it's connecting these local capabilities, these local farmers, all the way to the demand, the downstream.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you very much for putting all this on the table. We've been going 40 minutes, and as any professor knows, unless you give the students an opportunity to ask questions in this time frame, they start looking at their iPhones and checking out. And we're not going to let anyone check out. So let's take 2 or 3 questions in groups and come back to the audience. Let's perhaps start over here. We have a group of 3 here at the front, and then we will work back. Don't worry, we will reach you at the back. I will be sure about that. Okay, 3 questions, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm Elizabeth. I'm an AI researcher with domain knowledge in agriculture. I also am a former Syngenta employee, so hello. I'm very curious to hear your opinion on the role of kind of the next generation of transgenics or genetically engineered crops for not only resilience, but also food sovereignty. There's been a lot of evolution of technology in the last 10 years that's really unlocked a lot of potential for transgenics. On the other hand, there's been historically a tremendous resistance against the adoption of transgenics, genetically engineered crops, GMOs, however you want to call them. So I'd really like to hear your perspective on whether or not or how transgenics can fit into that picture. So thank you.
Thank you. With the second one and then the third here, please.
Thank you for your presentation. And briefly, I just want to say something as someone from Sudan. My name is Abdulaziz. I'm from Sudan. Speaking of Sudan, I mean, for those who actually don't know about Sudan, Sudan is, I think, you already said it, the panelists already mentioned it, but just to give a quick recap, I think for myself, I believe that the international community has completely failed on Sudan. One of the reasons why they failed is when the war started in Sudan in 2003, I can say, that's a pretty much civil war. the international community hasn't done actually much to prevent it and hasn't actually done much to even stop it. And then until like most recently now, we see Sudan actually fall into another war. And this time it's not a civil war. These are the two generals, military and paramilitary, are killing each other. Speaking of Sudan, the land, Sudan actually has 51.5 million hectares. Yeah. This is really a land that can be, and if we are able to cultivate and use that land, we will not only feeding Africa, but I believe also we will feed the entire world. Exactly. Sudan, back in the days, it used to be called the basket of the food of the world. And it's for a reason, and that's during the colonial, I think, back in the 1950s. But after the colonial left, we always based our system of agriculture on the colonial style. We have never changed it because we haven't actually got that opportunity to change it due to, I think, the institution haven't reached out to the people who own the land. But again, I will come back to my question. Now we are actually talking about Sudan. The question in Sudan, I mean, right now, we are not actually look at Sudan from, we cannot address the issue from top down. If we want to address the issue in Sudan and use the land of Sudan to feed the war and prevent the hunger, that the food shortages, we have to address it from the bottom up. And the bottom up is, number one, we need to reach to the landowners. Number two, we need to actually educate them. What is really missing is education. Number two is technology. And number three, the concept of the agriculture that we see in Europe, if we're trying to replicate it in Sudan, it needs some time, but it will work. But how do we get there? So the question is, I want to ask to the panelists is, how can we resolve issues such as like actually very anchor institution that actually deep state in Sudan? Because Sudan has two states, the deep state. How do we actually address the issue of the deep state in Sudan? And how actually we can reach to the young, entrepreneurs, Sudanese who are really willing to sacrifice their life to help, using the land of Sudan. What we don't see, actually, there's no trust. And several, actually, young people who reach out to the international community to ask for help to build that trust, but we don't see the trust. How can we build that trust as well? Thank you.
Thank you. We take one more, and we take one more question, and I come back to the panel. Please.
Hello, my name is Khalil Rodi. I am from Switzerland. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Buy Food with Plastic. So we tackle hunger and plastic pollution at the same time. And my question goes to the whole panel. Last year, for example, we fed 72 billion animals. And at the same time, we have not been able to feed 8 billion people. In my opinion, it's so obvious, why don't we shift all that food which goes to the animals, not to the humans? I am aware that there are a lot of aspects to it, but I would like to know from you, what do you think is the major reason that we don't solve it also with that, with shifting food for animals to humans?
Thank you. So I come back to the panel. Now, to my panelists, please don't feel you have to answer each question. In fact, it would be good if you only answered one. And as you can see, there's a lot of demand for more questions. So let's have succinct, punchy answers, please.
I could try to hit the first and the third quickly.
Please. Thanks.
The question was about genetically modified seeds, but I'll tell you, the advances in technology today are enabling better breeding of seeds, genetic editing of seeds, which is apparently more acceptable to many consumers, and then there's genetically modified. I think there's a place for all three technologies, but I can tell you that the breeding, the natural breeding, is accelerating a lot because of AI. And I'll give you one example. We sell a corn today called Artesian. We looked at all of our thousands of hybrids all around the world and saw which ones performed well despite high temperature drought conditions. And some of them, a few of them, were far better than any others. So we looked at the genetic makeup of those plants and found that there was mutations that were different than the others, natural mutations. So we bred that natural mutation into all other corn products. We expected it to be a niche market. Now it's a very big market for us. We have Impossible Foods and other plant-based companies coming to us and saying, soybeans have been bred for animals for 50 years. Breed them for good taste plant alternative products so that they don't have to add sodium and all these other things that make them less healthy. So the new technologies are enabling us to, I think, better meet climate resilience, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and meet consumer preferences for plant-based products.
Thank you. Bineta?
Just to add on that, we have also to look at the community, what they produce, in terms of the products that they have. We have the local knowledge, how they can, conserve and transform the seeds. We need to empower them for them to be able to, and there is so much knowledge on the ground. And if we can build into those communities what Peter called the bottom-up approach, they have solutions. And if, Syngenta can work with the local community and utilize their own local knowledge. I have seen that in one of the studies that Anga project is with Makerere University to look at on the knowledge and what they need agriculture, they need at the community. And one of this is, utilizing what they know themselves, but making sure that we bring it with the new technology that you have to make sure that they can also have more impact. And that's what we get. So coming to the issue of Sudan, the issue of peace, the culture of peace, and I think we're talking at the university, we need also to have curriculum on peace. It's not just the absence of war. It's how do you resolve your conflict without, by having dialogue. At the end of the day, the people of Sudan will be sitting at the table and having an agreement, maybe. And that's if they don't kill one another until the end. So they need to sit down. We need to bring them at the table and make sure that, they discuss and they give and take, but also they look into their population. These are the two Sudanese people that are killing their own people because of power, because of greed, because of control. And I think that is where we need to build the leadership will care about their own people, their own population. And by building this leadership in the university like this is to empower, to give the skills to the student, that tomorrow you will be the leader of Sudan, and how you are going to, bring the social benefit for the people, the economic, etc., and not there for yourself and for your community. So the culture of peace is something that I really think that we need to build on. So then you can make sure that Sudan, le grenier, the Sudan will be the one feeding Africa, and Sudan will feed the world. Thank you.
To the danger to use a catchword, but nature-based solution is something which is very often interestingly adapted to some of the contexts we are talking. And I think while it may not be an alternative, it may be another dimension to explore compared to high-tech modification of agricultural goods. I would agree that preventing and stopping wars is, of course, better than coming afterwards. That's obvious. But it is also true, and my experience that, as Bineta just alluded to, also the prevention and stopping of war has to grow internally. I don't want to exculpate the international community. I would agree that they haven't done enough and they haven't invested enough in the preventing of wars in which they were themselves involved. Having said that, you can't impose peace or preventing wars either. It needs homegrown solutions as well. And then I have a slightly different analysis from my experience, but I think it's up to discussion. Maybe I have misunderstood you. While I would agree that technology, capital, know-how, education is critically important, I have always been surprised in each and every of the fragile context I was, how much is already there. Is already there, which can and needs support. But it's the kind of intrinsic intelligence of communities which we shouldn't neglect either. There is a space to do immediately. Don't wait for the big training program. It will come as we build positive dynamics. But positive dynamics are already there, and I think it is important to recognize those positive dynamics.
I would just add to that there's a lot of initiatives that are already going on, and the ones that work well, we should highlight and scale, versus always trying to start new initiatives and they kind of fade away. And let's back countries, let's back villages, let's back initiatives that are successful, learn from them, and you help us, the younger generation, to make sure that we scale them.
Very good. Let's take the questions from the back that I promised. 3, please, from the back. And then let's come back to our panelists. Please, short interventions would be appreciated. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ricardo. I'm a student of political science at ETH. And my question is, how can we make sure that the rollout of industrialized and more efficient agriculture in Africa does not come at the cost of a further reduction and damage to biodiversity? The question goes especially to Mr. Fyrwald, because it's well known that Syngenta's pesticides, while helping improving the efficiency of agriculture, also have very damaging effects on biodiversity. Thank you.
Second question, please.
Good morning, and thank you for a fascinating discussion. Bineta, my question is to you, but I'll be happy for other reactions. Yes, Africa can feed the world, but I think there is a strong set of people who don't want that to happen. Africa buys $35 to $40 billion worth of food. If you were to start feeding the world, what would happen to those sales? There is a strong lobby which benefits from scarcity, and that's a fundamental economic model. I'm an economist and a writer from India. I'm Pranjal Sharma. So if you understand economics and global economics, scarcity is great business. There is artificial scarcity in food. Let me give 2 factoids to back this, and I'll request your reaction. One, when Ukraine tried to sell its wheat, 2 of the European Union countries refused to buy it. It's a very harsh fact. It just happened a few weeks ago. We all care for Ukraine, but when Ukraine wanted to sell, local farmers in Europe refused to allow access, which means there is huge competitive forces over here. Second fact, as of today, more than €1 billion worth of subsidy is given every day to European farmers. €1 billion every day. This has been debated in WTO, but it is still existing in 2023. With this kind of money to support existing producers, why would they allow new producers to enter the global market?
Let's take a third question, please. Anyone else? Please, we have a lady at the front, colleague at the front here.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Giulia Schiff. I'm former Italian Air Force pilot and former special operation and drone operator in Ukraine. Now I'm running my own NGO to deliver humanitarian aid to the hotspots, not only militaries, but also civilians and hospitals. I was wondering if there were any ideas and solutions after all the pollution that the war had created in the fields, after heavy metals bombings, and so on.
Thank you.
I just quickly speak to the last question with a story. Every other week, we have a call with our Ukraine leadership team. And normally in history, you know, we talk to our teams about what new products there are, what's going on in the marketplace, how are we serving farmers. Their only request this time was, we don't need better seeds, we don't need better crop protection, we don't need better fertilizers, we need demining equipment. We need Syngenta and others to come together to help farmers. Their number one need is demining equipment. That's very sad, but it's true, and we have to all come together and help the farmers of Ukraine who are bravely growing crops for Ukraine and for the world.
And it's a well-known fact for decades. It's true for Ukraine, it's true for many other contexts. The first thing to do is humanitarian demining before you can even start thinking about a future strategy of rebuilding a country. Cambodia has, Indochina has seen it. We have taken 25 years to basically demine at a satisfactory level some of the wars of the 1960s and 70s. The International Mine Action Convention has been invented also and has been designed and negotiated, and the whole infrastructure that the international community put together is because exactly what you say is true. It just repeats itself. The good part of the story is that basically we know how to do it. The bad start of the story is that no deminers go into eastern Ukraine at the present moment to demine because you need basic ramifications to demine. There is no point in demining eastern Ukraine when the war is going on. And that's one of the conundrums we have encountered in so many contexts. It already puts again in the center the kind of political conditions you need to even start with all the good ideas that we have on how to deal with food security. You need minimal conditions in which some of the frontline humanitarians, deminers, explosive ordinances, the contamination specialists. There are whole teams around the world, NGOs specialized in dangerous contamination of soil, environmental impacts of warfare, and at the end of the day, they will start work the day or the hour after a ceasefire agreement.
Please.
The kind of injustice that you mentioned when it comes to trade, and also when you look at the system that give privilege to some, and you know, the issue also of the shrinking right now of multilateralism as well, because when we look at, it's not just a trade, but it's also peace and security. If I take my continent, Africa, you know, we don't have a seat. You will tell me Germany doesn't have it at a permanent seat at the Security Council. So those are things that we all aware of, that there is a need to, you know, to have more justice globally. And that's why we are here today to talk about that we are in one world. When we look at the COVID, we look at the conflict in Ukraine, it impacts everybody. So if we are smart enough and we have our human rights in front of us, we will say that if what affects the world, what affects Europe will affect also Africa. But in the other hand, also there are opportunities, because we are realizing that if we don't take our destiny in our hands, we will not get anywhere. Nobody will come and fix your house. You know, you have to fix it and maybe call for some kind of support. And we are not asking for aid. What we are asking for is technology and so on. So we have created right now in Africa what we say the Africa Free Trade Area, which is an open market. We will be, we are right now 1 billion and 0.2 consumers. So that's the population of Africa. So if we open our market, if the 54 countries open and we can trade among ourselves, let's start with that. I think we will, this is the new opportunity for us if we start that, because now we have the trade barriers that are existing. So if our policymakers make sure that we open that market within Africa itself, I think we are going to really feed ourselves. And that's where we need to start. What we need now is the genuine partnership. We need to, for example, not just industrialize by taking care of the gas emission, climate change, and all this, but we need to make sure that the technology that exists can help us to not wait for so many 100 years to get there, but make sure that we access, and that's where private sector can come in to support and to make sure that we are able to scale it up by manufacturing and so on, so forth, and using new technology. There are so many innovative things when it comes to water scarcity and in the agriculture, in this business. So yes, why can't we learn from one another? Because that is what needs to be done to empower our people, to empower, as we said from the beginning, our community. But the injustice is there, but we need to take care of our own destiny ourselves. Thank you.
Erik. There was a very important question about biodiversity and industrial agriculture that I want to address. And I'll start by admitting that 10 years ago, the goal of Syngenta, Monsanto, Bayer, DuPont, ADM, Cargill, and large farmers was get the highest yield possible to have enough food for everybody. So corn after corn, how do you get higher yield? That was the goal. What I would say is we've evolved. And today, the goal of Syngenta, I can promise you, and many other agriculture and food companies, is how do we grow enough food for everybody in the world in a way that addresses climate change and protects biodiversity. The outcome goal of what we call regenerative agriculture is grow more with less land, so more land is back to nature, reduce greenhouse gas emissions towards zero, and protect biodiversity. And that includes soil health, the microbiome of the soil, it includes insect populations, it includes other elements of biodiversity that we're now measuring. And I'll give you one story. So our MAP Center business is trying to pull together the full solution set and only use the inputs needed to get the high quality and protect biodiversity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're working together with Nestle in Asia, and we have demonstrated that using regenerative type practices of crop rotations, cover crops in the winter, so you always have covering the ground so there's less erosion, and healthier soils dramatically increases yield and reduces greenhouse gas emissions and protects biodiversity. We've got the data, independent, developed by Cool Farm, a very innovative startup, and we've got to scale these types of solutions, but it can be done. And this is what, when we have these full solution approaches, this is what enables smallholder farmers to lift up.
Thank you. Let's go back to see if there are any more questions. We have we have three. Excellent. So let's start at the back and then come forward. Please.
Hello, and thank you for your insights, first of all. I wanted to go back to the very beginning of our session when you mentioned that land ownership and land use is a deeply gendered issue. Land is owned by men, but worked on by women. So for global food security, what importance do you see in actual land ownership? And how do you think we can create a more equitable and a fairer access to the right to land? Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question up here. Gentleman up here.
Hi, I'm Maximilian. I'm a biotechnologist based in Basel. And I have a bit more technical question, mainly for Erik, I guess. So there's voices more and more saying that fertilizer might be a source which is very limited in the future, in particular nitrogen, which plants need to grow. You think this is something which will really hit us in maybe not 5 years, but 50 years? Because it's a topic which is barely discussed in the public. Thank you.
And we have a lady here as well with a question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a history student and journalist from Germany, and I want to circle back to the question from the front because I don't think it was properly answered about why we waste so much food that could be directly distributed to people by feeding it to animals first, and how can we have a more plant-based diet properly based in society?
Thank you. Peter, do you want to go first?
Well, I would try, and indeed, sorry, we missed that important question. I think it goes to the point I want to make here on the panel, that you need to have a theory of change, and the theory of change won't deliver you from today to tomorrow on a good idea. Food consumption and production is intrinsically linked to behavioral patterns, to production and consumption patterns, as we see, to industries existing and societal dynamics is existing, and you can't just say tomorrow to an Argentinian not to eat steak from the day after tomorrow, but to eat something else. So it needs much more developed insight, sensitivity, and we have seen in our society, which is a luxury society, how long it takes to shift some of the intrinsically and culturally linked consumption patterns. It goes into behavioral science, which I think is also so important when we discuss something like food security, because we still struggle in changing behaviors according to scientific insight or to evidence-based insight. People don't change behavior because something is right. They may at a certain moment, under certain conditions, and I think it's really this whole idea on how do we change society in those strategically critical issues. And I would very much agree that food security and the approach you are taking is the right one, but it needs then a whole battery of strategic thinking behind on how you change the consumption production patterns and the behaviors.
But I think one practical step that we can take is having consumers know about the food that they're eating and what the greenhouse gas footprint is. With our map centers, we've started something with going all the way with this cool farm measurement from the farm to the consumer. The consumer can scan a code, see a picture of the farmer that grew their tomatoes or their apples, and see the greenhouse gas footprint. And they are choosing products with a lower greenhouse gas footprint. I believe that if all consumers, every time you bought a food product, you knew the greenhouse gas footprint, some of them being positive, you would choose that.
Bineta.
I will respond maybe to the issues of land, access to land, especially for women. You know what? One of the campaign that the women have done in Africa was that to put our leaders, our head of state, in a room and say that there is a need to have a policy that provide that possibility to access land. And one of the decisions that was 30% of arable land, they took a decision when you push them in the corner, 30% of arable land will go to the women. So, but yet it's a paper. So now how do you make sure that it is implemented actions? So the women's movement start by collecting data, accountability platform, to see in each country how much land have been given to the women, or even access. Is not just owning land, but you can provide them, for 10 years, for example, or 20 years, access to the land, so they will be feeling that they are, they own that the land. But also engaging with traditional leaders, because most of the lands are also owned at the local, the traditional. So you need to engage and show that it is a benefit when the women and the young people are the ones that are, having access. And they will feel comfortable, because I have received so many example cases where women come and produce and are supported by NGOs like us. At the end of the day, when the men realize that the land is producing and is so much good, they come and take it from the women. So those are things, that injustice that exists, that we need to fight, and we build the leadership, and that's why our community-led program, we make sure that the access to land, but also that the women are leading in that process, but engaging with the traditional leaders as well, and the religious leaders and traditional leaders, which think that women should not be given that right. But they are women's rights defenders, as you could see, on land issues and so many other issues in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a question.
There was an important question on nitrogen. Yeah. Nitrogen is one of the big greenhouse gas emissions from industrial agriculture. At Syngenta, we were the largest supplier of nitrogen in Asia. We have gotten out of the nitrogen business, and we've gotten into what we're calling a biofertilizer approach, where we're selling products, for example, microorganisms that enable nitrogen to be pulled out of the air and can get them to plants. So this is actually helping solve the problem instead of creating the problem. So by going from our metric only being revenue and earnings and yield, to our metrics being, of course, we have to be a sustainable, profitable company, but including yield, greenhouse gas reductions, and biodiversity protection, we take actions like this. And we build it into this MAP business, this Farmer Solution Center business, where the goal is the outcomes with less inputs, so the absolute minimum nitrogen use. And in countries like China, they've been using 3 times more nitrogen than Europe and the US per unit of corn or rice, because they thought it would give them higher yield, and the government was incentivizing, was reducing the cost, was subsidizing. Well, now, if we can take that down to below what the world is using and the rest of the world down, we can have a huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. We have time for one more round of questions at least. So we have 2 hands up at the front here. Please, let's give a mic to this gentleman, and then to the colleague behind.
Hello everyone, my name is Harsh, I'm from India. So my question here is, here we discussed a lot about the farm aspect of it, but the food has to reach the fork, that is farm to fork, and for that the supply chain has to be very efficient. From what I have observed in India, you produce a lot, but then a lot of the food crops and food grains get wasted in the government godowns or warehouses and does not actually reach. So even we increase our efficiency or productivity on the farms, it is actually not reaching where it was supposed to reach. So what are some of the best practices that you have seen, or what can be implemented to reduce this food wastage?
I'll give you one example.
Can we collect a few?
Go ahead. Thank you. I got so excited. Great question.
Please.
Yeah, good afternoon. I think it's afternoon. Yeah, I'm Joseph from Kenya. I'm studying in Tanzania. I think my question is very similar to what Harsh was asking.
Yeah.
It's all about, I've recently seen a video of farmers in Nigeria destroying eggs because of overproduction. So my question along the lines of the first question is all about how we can connect the person with the highest production with the person with the greatest need in terms of food. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Very good question. Now let's a third question, if there is one. Otherwise, we go back to the panel. All right. Erik.
Now I can go. I was just in India a month ago in a state called Tanananga State, where we worked together, Syngenta Foundation, and some other companies with the local government, and we're building something called wayside markets. So if you drive through much of rural India, you'll see these people selling out on the streets, dusty streets. If it starts raining, they can't go to the bathroom, they don't have bathrooms, they can't take care of their kids. So we're building with the local governments these wayside markets, which are clean, have bathrooms, are concrete so that they can be washed, and have childcare. And we've built 4 of them so far. We need hundreds of them. And I think it's a great example. But anyway, each of these markets has hundreds of farmers that can then sell their goods in a clean way and get a much higher price because it's not going to the middleman who's taking it somewhere else. So I think that helping local farmers connect to markets either themselves or connect downstream to food companies is the only way to go. We got to, as you were saying, we've got to cut out the middle person who's just taking a big profit and not adding any value.
And on top of it, Erik, is also, the food wastage, that we need to make sure that, we have also the place where the stock that the people, the community can keep their product in all time. Because reaching to the market sometime, it's not immediate. I have seen in my country so many food at certain time because it's a lot produced and the market is overwhelmed. So you need to keep those products and be able to sell them at another time. And I think that is where we needed to invest as well. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't have the industry around it to keep the food in our country, and that is part of that the chain that you described to make sure that but also producing every time. For example, I see in some of the countries that you have 3 months of rainfall, and you just produce for that during those 3 months. So what happened for the rest of the year? So you need to make sure that they have the possibility by new technology, that using the wise way for the water and so on, that irrigation, so you control that and you are able to produce the 12 months to produce the food. So then you have the possibility, the sustainability for the population, for the community. So we need to look at it in a more inclusive way, that everything being, developed by different actors. It's not just one actor. It's really different, but having the same objective to work together, government, private sector, but also the community themselves, and even the NGOs like us to be part of the process, the platform. Thank you.
Even if we have spoken primarily about production and not about distribution, I think what we said about production, for me, is also valid for production. I mean, it needs entrepreneurial, and it needs entrepreneurial spirit and capital to make distribution work in these different contexts. I just wanted to add one element, which, of course, you know by heart coming from India, but one of the big challenges we have on the distribution side, of course, today, and on the food longevity, is at the end of the day urbanization. Most of the food insecure today are not in agricultural lands. They are in suburbs of cities. We have 2 billion people around the world who live below or at poverty line with a high prevalence of slum population. And we know that urbanization is primarily growing at rapid pace in Asia, in the Middle East and Africa and Latin America, not in Europe and and the United States. Europe and the United States are the least organized, the least urbanized continents, and the best in terms of transportation of logistics and availability. So this just highlights the importance of your question, but also accentuates it maybe to a dimension we haven't sufficiently focused on, that the really food insecure are, at the present moment, the fast urbanizing populations in the global south.
Thank you. Listening to the first question, also the destruction of products that cannot be sold begs the question about bringing suppliers and buyers together. The question we had about subsidies also implicates international trade as well. So, agricultural trade has been one of the most difficult to get governments to agree on liberalizing, and it's a very difficult file at the WTO. Clearly, this is the signals sent by bad policies here can't help. But nothing I've heard from you suggests that this will be a fundamental blockage to all of the strategies you've been articulating, or is there something we really do need to worry about from the trading system?
I'll just reinforce the comment you made earlier about the Africa Free Trade Agreement. I think that's very important because there's seeds grown in different parts of Africa and crops grown in different parts. If they can move freely across Africa, it will greatly reduce costs of the whole system, and enable more collaboration, and enhance African agriculture.
So that's a plea for regional integration.
A plea for that to be completed. The concept's there, but now it needs to be put in practice.
We have, 2 more questions when we've got 7 minutes and 30 seconds. So let's have quick questions, please, and even quicker answers.
So I've been wondering about food waste. When I was collecting humanitarian aid, not talking just about food, but one big example I can bring, we had an entire load of antiseptic that was expired, but it's just kind of alcohol, so it's not really expiring, but we would not have the legal authorization to deliver it, and we had to do it anyway, risking by our own, because it was like necessity, high necessity. So I've been traveling a lot during my whole life in all the different continents, and I've seen like a lot of food waste everywhere, and if the food waste that is happening was not gonna keep going, with the food that is wasted, we could feed all the rest of the people of the world, especially for the
we have your question. The clock is ticking.
Of course. There is any project or any ideas even you can bring to make sensibilization through governments and so on bring an education on don't waste food?
Thank you. Let's get the second question, hopefully a minute from this, and then we still have time to answer them. Thank you.
Hi, folks. My name is Emma, and I'm coming from Canada. I know it's not a context we've really been talking about lately, but food production is quite a big topic in Canada, and recently discussion about reimagining the monocrop and integrating things like the Three Sisters approach into growing food and how we approach growing food and really localizing a food system that's been really globalized and addressing things like supply chain and food waste in that. And I was just wondering if you've seen a progression or a trend towards the localization of food production, and if you have, what you think about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 1 minute answers, please. We have one more question. This would really be to be fast. Okay? You're our 14th questioner from the floor, so please.
Very quickly, 8 billion people on the planet. We're heading to 10 billion. We have 900 million in chronic malnutrition, 1 billion obese, of which 60% are malnourished. We've talked about a lot of issues today: diet, industrial agriculture, localization. What would you say we need to do to look ahead to 2050 and make sure we have healthy, nutritious food for all? What would your top priorities be?
Thank you. We have 1 minute each. So, Bineta, impossible task, but you're up for it. 1 minute, please.
You know, for me, just to say that I have been with Peter, you know, in many conflict zones in Africa, supporting the women, the community. That is, you know, the solidarity that spending my life in where conflict and making sure the community lead. So for me, agriculture is one of the, you know, it's the sector I see that is promising as well, because we have the potential. We have the land, we have the water, we have, you know, the population that are there, the community. So I think if we are able to concentrate on some of those, of course, stability in our continent is also something that we need to work on. But I think that we will be able to build the resilience of the community. I have seen this happening in many places when they become self-reliant, because they are the one now, you know, just you know, cultivating, producing, but also put it at the table, the fork, you know, and taking care of their children. So I think that there is hope. For me, we need to work together, build that confidence, and among ourselves, and as partners, we can be, you know, feeding ourselves and probably also the market. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Erik, your minute, please.
Yeah, two quick comments. One is I'm optimistic about the future. I've had 40 years in agriculture, and I can tell you that today there's more purpose and commitment and technology and capability around the world willing to collaborate. So if we all come together and agree that we're going to tackle this, this is the problem facing the world, food security and climate change, and we work together, we will solve this. I promise you that the scientists in Syngenta that are working on technologies, come and see us. Come to Stein and see. They want to make the world better. They're absolutely committed. So working together, we can solve this. I'm seeing great progress across Asia. China, Indonesia, Bangladesh. Bangladesh has come far in agriculture development. Where I see the greatest need is in Africa, and we have to work together to work with national governments that are willing to commit, local governments, companies, NGOs, work together, bring solutions to farmers and connect them downstream. We can solve this, but it has to be together, and it has to be a food systems approach with that collaboration.
Peter, your minute, please. Closing remarks.
Well, from my side, and emphasizing what both my colleagues have said, and just say that my hope lies in strengthening entrepreneurship, in building markets, and in making capital available against impact in the most fragile contexts of the world. And that's possible, but it needs fundamental change, overcoming of obstacles within organizations, within countries, within actors. And it's possible whether we talk about food security or climate change or anything else. What today is a slight glimmer of hope is when I read the first statement of the new World Bank president, who said that he wants to move the bank into more fragile contexts, to de-risk private investment with public World Bank capital. So these are formulas which I think will encourage entrepreneurship, market creation, and impact investment, which is so critically important, impact investment against global public goods. And that's what we are increasingly talking about. And I was really happy when I heard you about also the transformation happening within Syngenta. I think we need to have a new deal on the return on investment formula. And how do we cope with return investment and impact? And that's the big question, and it needs a little bit more brains from this audience as well. Thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this highly engaging session. I hope you will join me in thanking several people, our panelists, the audience, the moderator, and indeed all of the support team from the St.Gallen Symposium. Have a great lunch, and we are resuming at 2 o'clock, I'm told. Bon appetit.